E bem-vindos ao painel de Desenvolvimento de Serviços Aéreos e Turismo. Good afternoon, welcome to this panel, Airlines and Airlift and Tourism. We have here a fantastic panel. On my left, Patrick Hedley, the General Manager for Lufthansa Group here in Portugal. With Lufthansa since '94, lived in exciting places like Yemen, now lived through the pandemic, so has surely a lot to tell. Rodrigo or Sérgio Almeida, who is the business director for Travelstore for the last 20 years, specialized in corporate travel, both individual and groups. We hope we have, from the other side of the Atlantic, Sérgio Almeida, who is, Rodrigo Vieira de Sousa. Hi, Rodrigo, how are you? Rodrigo is the CCO of Fraport Brazil, managing now two airports, Porto Alegre and Fortaleza, after having managed during 10 years various other airports in Brazil. And last but not least, Gavin Eccles. Gavin has been a consultant for aviation and tourism for 25 years, plus with operational experience in airlines. So we hope we have here not much time for many questions, and I've organized this in two general questions, and then one individual question for each of the members. And the first one is basically, we are in October. This is time for budgeting 2022 to do forecasts. So starting here with Patrick, what is your and Lufthansa Group forecast in terms of travel and tourism for 2022?
Well, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be here. And I would sum it up with one word, and I'm optimistic for 2022. I'm optimistic for various reasons. If I look back just a couple of months, August, September, October, I've traveled quite a lot, and I could see lots of passengers traveling through airports. You can see cities across Europe with tourists again, and that is definitely a good sign. So winter 21, 22, we're entering that phase right now. We have more or less an extended summer, as we could say, with the great weather, for example, we have here in Portugal, but other parts of Europe too. And it's a test. I think winter is a test and a good indicator for 2022. Well, the pandemic must remain under control. This is definitely a challenge, but we see some optimistic signs, even for the Lufthansa Group here in Portugal. If we look at December, for example, we have some additional frequencies. If we see Funchal, Madeira, we will have double the amount of frequencies we had in 2019. So it's looking optimistic. Most important thing is that we have a gradual and steady increase of passenger confidence, and I'm sure 2022 will be an even better year than 2021.
Thank you. Sergio, the same question to you. You that are more in the corporate market, what's your view on 2022?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you also for the invitation. I think we are in a fantastic time for comparing forecasts and projections with reality. There's been a lot of studies during the pandemic on how the demand will behave whenever things slow down in terms of the COVID and security measures. And we've all been doing different forecasts. Actually, at the end of August, we did one, and I was asked if this was the last one. I said, well, I would prefer to wait for the middle of September because there'll be some more information, I think relevant information. And the truth is that September was much better than what we had expected. October is becoming also a little bit slightly better compared to September. So we are also very much optimistic. And what I wanted to say also about projections is that during all this pandemic, we try to keep close contact with our customers because they're the biggest source of information for us to forecast. And one of our biggest customers before the pandemic. It's a unicorn company, a Portuguese unicorn company. And they told us that they almost stopped during the pandemic. They stopped traveling. And they told me, Sérgio, it will be very difficult for us to look at the future and think that we will travel as much as we did before. We are comfortable working from home, using the technology. So don't expect that much. September, they traveled as much as they traveled in September 2019. So that's our forecasts go. So generally speaking, I think that the environment here in Portugal is positive. I think worldwide is also, well, it's key because I think this pandemic has also shown us that we can not look at one country and solve things in one country because we can be okay here, but then if our biggest economic partners are not doing well, we're not traveling anywhere. So this has to be all in a kind of a parity way. And as far as we see and our customers tell us, I think that the future, not saying that it's bright, but I think it's positive.
Okay. Rodrigo, are there any good news from Brazil?
Yeah. First of all, I would like to thank you, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Unfortunately, I cannot be physically among with you, but it's a pleasure to be here. In Brazil, as vaccination go forward, what you can see is the passenger is coming to flight. Unfortunately, the international flight is not so predictable, but the domestic flight is recovering faster than we expected. One example about it, last month, we are achieving more than 70% in comparison with 20 and 19 at the both airports. And we are expecting to the end of this year, achieve more than 85%. Of course, people would like to travel, people are really anxious to new opportunities. And so right now, the airlines and do all possible, all the times you are looking more slots. As the owner of the airport, you have a lot of opportunities. People are consuming much more. One example, how the passenger behavior changed as long this period. The spend per pax is so higher than ever. So the news from Brazil is really optimistic, and I may say that optimism is the right word to that question.
Thank you. So Gavin, your bird eye view over relating to 2022.
Okay, thank you, Luís. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, obviously in a consultant or a professor's position, where are we looking? If we go back, it was mentioned this morning that September the 11th. September the 11th, we lost 1% of the available seat kilometers during the year of that disaster. In 2020, we lost 70% of the available seat kilometers. So you can't compare, obviously, where we've come from. We can only hope, and as you say, what might 2022 look like? In October, the start of October, we'd recovered here in Europe to about 70% of 2019's capacity. Now that's obviously what the seats would be. Load factor is about 20 to 30 percentage points below capacity. So on the supply side, it's looking quite good. On the demand side, there's work to be done, and I'm sure that will be part of the next questions. So I think the optimism has been pushed by airlines putting supply back. And there is a vision by 2022, we should have around 80% in Europe recovered on seat capacity. Asia is obviously the market that is least in relation to the globe. But in Europe, there seems to be very strong optimism. The capacity will be there. What airlines now, tourism boards will be pushing for is how to generate demand. And that's something that we know, one thing is supply, but it's the demand which needs to come back fast as well.
Okay, thank you. Now coming back here to Patrick, airlines make the real money in premium classes for corporate travel in long haul, and it seems that is not returning as fast as leisure. We saw even before the pandemic, Lufthansa starting with a leisure strategy in the summer. Now we see Lufthansa coming into Açores, to keeping flights to Algarve. You also have in the group other companies also going more on the leisure side. Tell me, what can we expect for Portugal in the next couple of years regarding the Lufthansa group?
Well, I'll try to break down a little bit the question into two aspects. On one side, you were talking about corporate travel, which normally brings in a good chunk of the business, especially for a network carrier like ours. It's a bit of a mixed bag. So if we look at qualitative data, and if we look at even if you asked me that question 3 months ago, I would have most probably answered it in a different way. Sergio was talking about a little bit about forecasts. Yeah. You can't really do forecasts these days. So it's a mixed bag. The pandemic has brought about, for example, increase in private jet, for example, something that maybe we didn't really think about that. But then you talk to large corporate customers, and here we see that, yes, there are Zoom meetings and Teams meetings, although there's screen tiredness, they do forecast the corporate business to come back. In Europe, we are starting to see the corporate business coming back even at a faster pace. Long-haul travel in general is much lower because a number of countries have not reopened, right? So we are very much dependent also where we fly and how many times we can fly on the authorities. So that's with large corporates and, let's say, premium travelers. Then we have the small medium enterprises. And small medium enterprises, and something we've been talking to them a lot, especially if I refer to Portugal, they all say one thing. They say Zoom and Teams is great if we want to maintain a customer. But to get new business, we must travel. So if we need to find new customers, we must travel, and we need to hunt for that new business. Which now brings me to the next part, which is VFR, visit friends and relatives, leisure travel. In many webinars, which maybe you have attended in 2020, which is, I think, was the norm, that we were just participating in webinars and webcasts, industry experts were all saying that what is going to come back first? Is it corporate? Is it leisure? And predominantly, people were saying it's going to be leisure. So here we have to definitely look at data. We have to listen to the customer. The customer has to be in the focus of anything that we do. And the customers were telling us, we want to travel, we need to travel. We know there is the aspect of restrictions, and our experience of 2020, when we, for example, finished the repatriation schedule by the end of May here in Portugal. Lufthansa did not stop flying to Portugal, and we worked in a very agile way where we added on capacity because Portugal was in demand. And we could see that, we could experience that firsthand because we're continuously adding flights in 2020. So come to 2021, we've added on to that data. We had 20 new routes from Frankfurt, 13 new routes from Munich. And then my highlight for being the general manager for Lufthansa Group in Portugal was the launch of 3 new routes to Portugal. And all this in the middle of the pandemic. And you mentioned Azores, which brings a smile to my face and also to my team. It was the highlight of our year because we launched Frankfurt Ponta Delgada, we launched Geneva Ponta Delgada with Swiss, and most recently we launched the Geneva Funchal. So we fly to the 5 main airports in Portugal. So come 2022, I expect that we're going to just keep on building on this. Customer confidence is coming back. As long as we have the pandemic under control, we have vaccinations, we have authorities talking about booster shots and so on. This all builds to consumer confidence. And ultimately, we just keep the customer in focus, and 2022 will be good for the airlines and eventually for the general tourism industry as well.
Thank you. Sérgio, you heard some good news here from the corporate market. You had already an issue before the pandemic, for instance, if we think about MICE and low costs that don't get your customers on their planes. How do you see here now, one, the MICE segment returning? And secondly, how can the legacy carriers help you, and what is the help that you need to bring this market back?
Okay. Will you allow me allow me just 1 minute to comment on Gavin's and Patrick's remarks.
Okay.
Gavin said, well, we have a problem with the demand. That's where we have to work on. And my call is that we work all together, because basically this morning there was a debate between the airport and IATA. And I think that, the challenge for us is for us to turn those prospective travelers into a proper traveler, for them to enter into the airplane. So what can we do? I think we can bring good news for them if we are able to tell them that their life is easier at the airport, or that the service they will have at the airplane is much better than what they used to have. I mean, if we are able to improve the customer experience, if we are able to customer-centric our approach, I think it will make it easier for the demands to come back and to stay. Because it's comfortable to stay at home on the Teams or Zoom meeting. It's not that expensive. So if someone goes to an airport and spends the money, he wants to have a good customer experience. That's what we believe, and I think that we have all to focus on the customer. Now, answering your question, MICE. Well, we have seen a rise in terms of the requests we get from previous customers and new customers around being able to travel, to group travel, either outside of Portugal or coming to Portugal. Big challenge, of course. I mean, MICE, you don't solve it by having a direct connection or having a good restaurant to offer to them. It has to be a good experience overall. So it has to be all in conjunction. And Portugal as a country was doing very well before the pandemic. And I think we are all eager, and I think we all believe we can pick up where we left off and continue to work together towards an objective to be competitive compared to other markets. During the pandemic, we saw that countries were kind of competing with each other in terms of the restrictions. We saw some countries really receiving most of the tourists because they were open to receive tourists, whereas others not. And I think now that we are doing very well in Portugal, we have to brand it correctly outside. We have to invest properly in incentivizing the sources of revenue that we believe will bring a positive return on investment, so that we are able to get that business. I mean, one of the things we noticed from customers that, whereas before they were accepting to have a commuting flight, I mean, not to fly directly, now they're not willing to have their travelers because they're investing a lot of money. So it's, again, customer experience. These companies are investing their money to have all of those people that they invite to travel to have a very good experience. So they're looking for direct flights. So that's one area that we would need to invest and look if we're getting the proper direct flights. Now, finalizing legacy airlines. What we see is that presently intercontinental flights are still very much restricted. We also saw in Asia and the United States, the domestic flight was the first one to pick up and almost be back to 2019 numbers. So eventually, intra-Europe could be also a source of growth compared to where we are. But we have to work on the customer experience. I think we mentioned about business class. Business class, in my view, became a bit of a luxury in terms of how you travel within Europe. You don't need some of the I would say that our travelers do not need some of the services that are offered in business class, nor that much expensive price compared to an economy fare. But you could look at it differently. You could probably, let's say, brand it differently. Let's say a work class, where you give some more space to the traveler, where you give a proper place for him to have the PC and work. Eventually, you offer him Wi-Fi in the airplane. So you offer some features that are directly interesting for the business traveler, and so again, you're improving your customer experience, and you're creating conditions to have more travelers traveling worldwide, and you're within your air flight. So it's a challenge for you, Patrick.
Right, but we are going now to the other side of Atlantic, to Rodrigo. Fraport is managing two airports with different locations, 4,000 kilometers away from each other. Fortaleza, the nearest airport to Europe and USA, and Porto Alegre in the south, very near also to the South American countries. Speaking of, as you have almost getting the same domestic travel, do you have already a strategy to capture international flights to both of your airports?
Before answering that question, it's important to understand what we were doing before COVID, because as airport, what we also do is creating infrastructure. Right now, an example, you are doing finishing the extension of the runway here in Porto Alegre. It will allow it to us aircrafts until Asia, and we opening right now the new international cargo terminal. So as airport, we will still doing it. Of course, you can do some incentives plans in order to bring more, giving some landing fees, some waivers about the taxes. And also you can do some, how you can reduce the cost of operations. It is what we were doing since before the COVID. But right now, the airport must think different, because the airline is still having a lot of service, but of course we are facing a lot of troubles, mainly about the barriers. They still closed it. So how you can join efforts with airline, how you can think as they think in order to bring it. So right now, we're still doing some incentive plans. I can give you some example. Air France will come back right in this month, October 22, and Azul announcing Montevideo and Punta del Este. It's only because we did some incentive plan, but much more than it, we are doing the opportunity to them. They use some airport assets. One example, Azul is using a merchandising our airport in order to introduce itself, and in order to show to the passenger what can do. Another example, they have a special condition in order to pick up and drop off passengers in our airport. Of course, it's a win-win, and maybe they can take the passenger 2 hours earlier or 3 hours, and the passenger can have a great experience in our airport in order to consume in our store. Of course, it's not enough. We need to join efforts, and so before that we call airline marketing. Now it is a new name, is airline service development. So you need to join as a community with government, agency development, all tourists, hotels, and attractions. In the both airports, you have a lot of opportunity to do. Here in Porto Alegre is closing from the Serra Gaúcha, and you have Gramado. Gramado is one of the most visited cities in Brazil. But of course, you have Fortaleza, has a beautiful weather and beaches. But you need to join, because the airline are thinking much more than only a financial. They are thinking about experiencing an opportunity. Of course, the demographic data and the potential market demand is still important, but you need to use all efforts in order to bring it to the airlines and the networks a full package of opportunities. Not only about the airport, but it's about the city, it's about the hotel, all tourist trade, and it's something like that what I'm looking for.
Okay, thank you. Gavin, we come to see a growth of connectivity as a precursor for growth in international tourism, and even before COVID-19, aviation and tourism were witnessing tremendous success. Tell a little bit, how did airlines and airports support route development pre-COVID? What has worked? What are the learnings? What can work again, or what need to be changed?
Good question. I think air services pre-COVID, I think airports had the bargaining power. Aviation was growing. IATA said around 7% in 2019, and predictions were that the aviation would grow around 5% after 2019 for the next 10 years. Obviously, the manufacturers, Airbus and Boeing, were turning out more and more aircraft. Airlines were taking new orders, and airports were able to determine on capacity constraints in certain markets. This is who we want. These are the airlines we're looking for. Are you ready to come into our destination? So I would say, with bargaining power, airports held the story. what they could do, and you know what you have in the airport world is that they can reduce their costs. So you could give fee waivers to an airline. You can say, okay, my landing charges are X, now they're Y. We can give you a volume deal for the amount of passengers that you can bring, and Rodrigo would be putting that together, and airlines would accept or not. And maybe tourism boards pre-COVID were a little bit seen the afterthought. So let's make a deal and see if there's any money. COVID has changed that. I mean, I would now say who's got the bargaining power? It's the airlines. Why? Because airlines have realized that their hardware, their aircraft, can be picked up and moved quite quickly. So in the pandemic, one of the fastest growing airports in the world was Bosiman Airport in the Yosemite National Park, because all of a sudden Americans could travel domestically. All of the big American carriers were not focusing on Chicago, Los Angeles, or Atlanta, and they put everything into the middle of nowhere. And you know, not like hotels that can't move their hotel from one building to another. Airlines have been able to say now, who wants our business? And so I think airlines are holding the power because they're experimenting. You know, we've seen a huge amount of experimental routes, and Patrick's mentioned the work that Lufthansa has done here with looking at the Azores as an opportunity. May not have happened, but other than the pandemic. But I think the learning I've been saying for many years is aviation and tourism, it's two sides of the same coin. And this pandemic has really put the importance on tourism boards. They need to be at the table. Not at the table when the deal's been made between an airline and an airport, but actually to put the vision forward and convince the airline that it's trust and its reliability. You know, I've been lucky, I've sat on both sides of the table. I've worked with tourism boards, I've worked for an airline, and I've negotiated for airports. And in the olden days, it was, yes, how much money do you have? That would be the first question from an airline. Today, it's not that question. It's how do we work together to support demand? Where's the demand going to come from? You know, you can write what we call a revenue guarantee. You can pay my losses. Now, in Europe, that's not so easy to do because of the European Union and state aid. But the thought process was, look, you fly, this is what you can bring me. If not, we'll pay the difference. No, that's not what the airline is now saying. What the airline wants is reassurance with the tourism together that we can support this. And then at the end of the day, the airport, and sorry, Rodrigo, but the airport is just the point that somebody arrives. Tourism creates demand, and the airlines work with tourism to support that. And I think that's where the pandemic has put tourism back at the table, really at the table, and can make a huge difference, and not just rely on airlines and airports getting together, creating a deal, and then hoping that somebody can help it. Because that's a short term, and that was what was happening because the capacity was just being pushed. Now we need to work demand. And I think that's where I would say the next phase of air services is airlines can make the decision, and tourism are there to help, and airports, the role then is, of course, to support that process, but it's more about triangulation and not 2 and 1, as I think what it was pre-COVID.
Thank you, Gavin. So going for the last question, which is more general, and although Gavin gave a partial response, but now from each of your business point of view, what is needed for this ecosystem, airlines, airport, tourist boards, travel agents, DMCs, other tourism partners to excel? What are the main challenges and threats? Starting by you, Patrick, in the same order.
Yeah, kind of echoes as well what we have been saying for the last half an hour. I believe let me start with the last part, with the challenges and threats, let's say. First and foremost, we are still in a pandemic. So we need to make sure that, at least if we look midterm, so let's say just 2022, that entry regulations are easier for the passenger to understand, for the customer. Once again, I talk about the customer focus. We need to have the customer in focus with whatever we're doing. So we need to take away the pain for the customer to travel, to fly, to enter a hotel, to enter a restaurant, and to make it easy for them to understand. Another thing is, so in this case, keeping the pandemic under control. Another thing which we need to keep in focus, and for the airlines, I believe it's also very crucial, is the price of oil. That is definitely a challenge in the last year. the price of oil went from $42 up to $80, $81. Yeah. So that is definitely a little bit of a challenge, I believe, especially in a recovery phase. But then I'm going to touch base on what was said as well, is really maintaining open dialogue with all stakeholders, tourism boards, as Gavin just said. A few years, 10 years ago, I was living in Cyprus, one of the countries I've worked in. So pretty much tourism driven. And when I got to Cyprus, and at that time, we had the IATA schedules. So they went from the 1st of April or 28th of March until the end of October. But summer in Cyprus is from the beginning of March and basically goes on until Christmas.
Right.
So it was immediately I sat down with some counterparts, hoteliers, also to understand, listen, in the winter we normally fly 3 flights a week compared to the 20 we fly in the summer. How can we beef up the schedule? So we sat together and we talked to them, also to understand which days of the week we can add on to the 3 flights. And this all came about with dialogue, and eventually we maintained a stable operation also throughout the winter, maybe not with the 21 flights a week we had back then. And similarly, when I came to Portugal in 2016, I saw similar opportunities, and we have to keep those opportunities. And the past always teaches us also how to approach the future. So looking at 2016, we transported 1.5 million passengers to and from Portugal. By 2018, when we tweaked our flight schedule, Portugal has a fantastic product. It was totally in demand. By 2018, we reached 2.5 million passengers. So it just goes to show you that with dialogue, listening to what the customer wants, analyzing the data and trying to meet the customer expectation and demand, I'm sure that tourism again will pick up, and we will have a definitely better 2022 and beyond. So I'll finish with the last word I said, with the first word I said, which is I'm optimistic.
Great, thank you, Patrick. Sérgio, up to you. A little bit challenge and threats. First, just a provocation. Do you think that when the tourism board incentivizes some routes, that they should oblige them to transport, for instance, in low costs, they should oblige them to transport groups in these routes?
Well, to be honest with you, I was not sure if low cost would organize groups because it's not my main area of concern. But I phoned my colleague and he's telling me low costs are now organizing groups. Of course, there's some challenges around low cost with the luggages and, again, customer service, which is not...
Passenger names, etc.
Yeah. But now allowing already to have the passenger names informed at a later time. So I think that low costs and legacy airlines, whereas probably 10 years ago they were the opposite. Now, legacy airlines have created their kind of discount or low cost offer, whereas low costs have also created their business-centric offer too. So they try to combine, and I think they close one to the other. So I would not separate one to the other, although of course there's differences. I think that, as I said it before, we have to work all together. Just like Patrick said, we have to listen to the customer, so be close to them, understand what's their needs, what are they looking for. Technology plays a huge role. I was attending some of the panels this morning, and I was wondering, why do we have to wait? Mr. Rafael from IATA was saying, well, technology will play a role in 10, 15 years. I said, what? Why doesn't technology already help? With facial recognition, you could check in at an airport easily. That's what I was saying just a few minutes ago. We need to give good news for the travelers, and those are the things that I think we should all invest. Now, just to finalize and then trying really to answer your provocation, tourism boards have to. Their role is to invest in trying to make the country more attractive as a tourist destination. And I think, not sure if money is the same as it was before, but my sense is that the suppliers, the travel agencies, the airlines, the hotels, the restaurants, all the other touristic offers are present. They are ready to pick up where we left off in 2019. And And that's it. Just one more thing that I would like to add, which is we have to learn from what happens. We made our life really difficult. And speaking as a travel agency, our team was spending 4-5 times more time on the transaction than they used to before, whereas our transaction fee remains the same, because we have to check all the requirements. So that's one of the areas I think we all have to look at for the future.
Hope so. Rodrigo, so what are here the challenge for you? I must say that many moons ago, when the real was strong, lots of destinations in the Northeast were doing campings in Europe to attract tourism. Now that the euro is strong, what do you think might happen? What are your challenges in this aspect?
Yeah, for me, and I fully agree with Gavin, the great challenge right now and how as airport you can do, you can be involved and try to manage the whole cooperation integration among all stakeholders. It's a great challenge that you have right now. But thinking about Portugal mainly, about the international flights, of course, going from Brazil to Europe, you told right now, our currency is a great challenge in order to attract passengers to Brazil from Brazil to Portugal. Of course, it's completely the opposite from Portugal to Brazil because the euro is higher than real. But I have another concern. It's about when you have a standardization of the vaccine passport or something like that. I just to give an example, if I travel to Europe before come back, I need to do a PCR test, and if a test positive, maybe I will spend more 14 days. So this kind of doubts, it's a really challenge that you have to face. And of course, it means it's also treats to our development. But we're still believing that the only joining forces and then thinking as our airlines planes will be the next step in order to going through about that situation.
Thank you. Gavin, wrap it up, take it home.
I think, from the question from the Portugal perspective, the ecosystem, I think, we have the conditions. I mean, it was interesting this morning, we've had both from the two different sides of the government, one about the national airline and what role that will play, and one from the secretary talking about the importance of aviation. So, it's a very topical subject within the country. And I think if you look in the last, as I mentioned about capacity, we've seen Ryanair increase 3 new planes into Lisbon Airport for this winter. We've seen EasyJet with a seasonal base now going to 4 flights for next summer. Wizz Air, which is the other large low-cost airline, has just launched a flight this morning into Porto. So I think the ecosystem on the aviation is working. Obviously, what Patrick and the Lufthansa Group and all of the work now with Eurowings growing significantly into Madeira, opening up bases in Stockholm. From the point of view of if you talk about low costs or legacy, I think, we've got the conditions and as was said, why is Ryanair interested in Portugal? Because it's a great destination. It's not just that, it's the fact that there is huge potential. And that's why Ryanair wants to be here, and as many airlines as we need to be here. So I think the conditions are there, the incentives are there, the challenges obviously with the infrastructure, that was also brought up this morning, and whether or not the airport will come live and all of those discussions. But I think on the periphery side, on what's happening in Algarve, what's going to happen in Madeira, what's happening in the north, there are airlines taking these opportunities. They're being experimental. They see great opportunities in Porto, so let's go in there. Great opportunities in the Algarve, let's build that. And I think, that's got to be good. And of course, the more that's supported, and, we've been hearing that, I think, we've got it in place. And of course, we're going to have the Hotel Association conference next month. They've got a panel about aviation. So, aviation is talked, I think, more in Portugal than many other countries. It's like the national team. Everybody knows the strategy of aviation for the country. But it's topical, and that's good to have, that people want the country to have a good industry of aviation. And as I've said, and I will leave, aviation and tourism, they are the same side of the coin.
So, wrapping this up, I think, thank you very much, all my 4 panelists. Thank you for your optimism also, for believing in 2022. I think it can be, from my point, and I work more in the hotel side, we see a lot of interest in Portugal, a lot of funds coming, wanting to buy hotels. If I would have 20 hotels on the Avenida da Liberdade to sell, I would sell them. So the interest in Portugal is here. We need airlines, we need the infrastructure, we need the operators to bring them home. And of course, I think it's the same in Brazil, where of course you have a very strong domestic travel, and good that it's coming. But there is a way also to do, and I think a positive way, to bring more international tourism to Brazil. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.